Hexagram 20, Seeing. The judgment. The abolition has been made, but not the offering. Full of trust, they look up to him. The sage indicates the theme of this hexagram to be the way we see ourselves, people, and situations. The abolition has been made, but not the offering, indicates a person who has fulfilled the shoulds and musts, the forms, required by the collective ego, and therefore looks at himself as good and correct, and thinks of himself as a model or leader. The sage informs us that self-development is not work at perfecting virtues, but the systematic deprogramming of aspects of the ego by which the true self is freed, and then allowing the true self to experience its leadership of the personality in partnership with the helpers. In this way, it is brought to full maturity. The offering referred to is the relinquishing of the personality props and crutches, roles and masks devised by the ego. This offering has not yet been made. So long as the person remains attached to the ego and its self-images, he will not know what it is to live life within the cosmic unity. Full of trust, they look up to him, can refer to looking up to societal authorities for one's personal authorization. The sage makes us aware that we are authorized by the cosmos by the very fact of our existence. We need no other authorization than to say yes to life. We also need to say the inner no to anyone who would attempt to take that authorization away from us. In regard to looking up to authorities, the sage informs us that although we are the sage's students, we are not meant to have an attitude of subservience, whereby we look up to the sage. Such an attitude is a decrease of self that is against the cosmic principles of the dignity and equality of every aspect of the cosmic whole. Looking up to the sage hinders the sage's ability to relate to us. This hexagram also makes us aware of how our body consciousness looks to our psyche, our sense of self, to understand how it can be of use. It is the function of the true self to lead the personality by listening to the common sense. The leadership of the true self is based on recognizing its interdependency with all the other functions of the psyche and body. However, when the ego in a person leads, his center of consciousness is removed from his body consciousness, a state commonly known as being in his head. The ego either devalues the body as a worthless bag of flesh, or a vehicle for the soul, or a tool to aggrandize his bodily vanity. A healthy connection between the body and psyche is a loving one in all respects. Despising the body or elevating it for vanity's sake is actively destructive both for body and psyche. Seeing, as the theme of this hexagram, seeks to make us aware that how we perceive things indicates whether we are in harmony with our true natures or not. It is noted throughout the I Ching how the ego has appropriated the sense of outer seeing to its purposes through asserting to the child at an early age what he sees externally is all there is. This means what he sees is all he is supposed to rely on, and that for what exists beyond seeing, he must rely on what he is told about it by adult authorities. With one stroke, these assertions take away from the child his innate connection with the cosmic consciousness and the invisible world, and further make him distrust or dismiss all those inner senses that are meant to connect him with that world. This hexagram counsels him to validate his ability to see within through reconnecting with his common sense. He can restore this connection by freeing himself from the spell put on his inner senses by the seed phrases, "You cannot trust your senses," and "You cannot rely on your feelings." It also requires ridding himself of the poison arrow that has declared his animal bodily nature to be the source of evil, and the poison arrow that has demonized his bodily needs as animal drives. This latter poison arrow also needs to be removed from animals and nature in general. It is this spell referred to in line 1, which has almost completely closed a door to his inner senses. Since it is through our inner senses that we are able to connect with the cosmic consciousness, the closing off of our inner senses also cuts off this connection, which is experienced psychologically as a deep fall and loss. It is the same fall which has been described as man's fall from grace. This hexagram also has to do with a person's seeing as from high on a tower. From this position, he is too removed from the practical reality where decisions are generated organically. Height can give the advantage of an overall view, but it is incapable of the kind of creativity that springs from a feeling relationship with things at their base. The clarity of the cosmic view is attained by combining the overview with a sense of what is needed on the most fundamental level. A person can also receive this hexagram when he is looking at matters from the standpoint of whether they fit into the policy structures that have been erected by law or custom as a way of guiding everything he does. A habituation to this way of seeing things deadens his inner senses and takes away all his chi energy. To alleviate his situation, he needs to say the inner no to this way of looking at things and ask for help to create a transformation in the situation. Finally, this hexagram addresses the question of being seen. The entire focus of the ego is on how and whether the person is being seen by others. The impulse to be seen comes from a primary doubt that has been instilled in the young child that unless he is seen, he does not exist, and his needs will not be met. This doubt is instilled by the collective ego to create the need in the child to develop self-images which those around him will recognize and approve. As long as this doubt and threat remain in his psyche, they will keep him needing the authorization of the collective ego for his existence until the day he rids himself of them. Fear to give up the self-images that compose the ego is the equivalent of the fear of extinction. Giving up the false fear of self-extinction is the most basic step he can make toward the liberation of his true self. Here are the lines. Line 1, boy-like seeing. Boy-like seeing describes the natural abilities of the child to recognize and respond to the inner truth of a situation. He can do this because his seeing is still coordinated with all his inner and outer senses, and therefore can give him a correct feeling of reality. A person may receive this line because some of his senses have been repressed through his having accepted the idea that they are lower instincts and part of his animal nature, and are therefore not to be trusted. This idea not only has slandered his true nature, it has placed a spell on his ability to perceive his inner truth. Boy-like seeing can also refer to an adult who contents with himself with the beliefs he accepted he would. So that again. Boy-like seeing can also refer to an adult who contents himself with the beliefs he accepted in childhood. This is due to spells that have been put on his inner senses, which keep him from questioning the beliefs with his adult mind. Phrases connected with such spells are, "The eyes see the truth," and, "If you want to know the truth about something, look at the way it shows itself." The truth is that what one sees with the eyes is only the appearance of it. Given the propensity of the ego to create illusions, what we see is often only the mask the thing wears, or else what we or the collective ego have projected upon it. When we slander senses, such as our senses of smell or taste, by viewing them as lower or unimportant, we block their figurative function of telling us when something smells or tastes rotten. Such perceptions are important components of our natural defenses that often warn us of dangers that our sense of feeling is conditioned to ignore or dismiss. Dismissing the senses as unimportant demonizes them, puts spells on them. and causes them to act in perverted ways. These perversions are the so-called animal drives that are described by the collective ego as the cause of evil. See freeing yourself from spells. A person can also receive this line to make him aware that during childhood he adopted a heroic self-image to please those around him. This self-image tells him he is worthy only if he sacrifices his own needs to the benefit of others. It constantly traps him in risk-laden and often self-destructive behaviors. In order to deprogram it, he needs to treat it as a spell formed by the phrase, "To be a really good person, you must be heroic." Such a phrase is a slander on his true self, which is good by nature. Freeing himself of this spell will also extinguish the fate it has created for him. Line 2. Seeing through the crack of the door. Seeing through the crack of the door refers to viewing something with a cautious or fearful attitude. A cautious attitude is quite natural on approaching something unknown. A fearful attitude, however, blocks the receptivity of all the inner senses that would tell us what it is, and indeed, whether it is to be feared, and if so, what specific response is required to protect us. This line tells about one of our protective senses, the sense of caution. Caution is a bodily response that, like an alarm clock, arouses a heightened awareness of problem elements in the situation, such as intimidation, flattery, lies, projections, spells, and poison arrows coming from another person. Caution allows the mind to stay open and receptive while being complete in its protective abilities. Other protective senses tell us which response is appropriate, provided they have not been blocked. Fear blocks the wholeness of our senses to perceive the truth of things and to respond appropriately to them. For example, when fear is present, the sense of caution is overruled and one's ability to respond appropriately to danger is frozen. Nothing positive can be said about fear, as is commonly assumed when people say, "You need to fear." Fear has its good side, and fear is our natural means of protection. Furthermore, fear is unnatural. It is instilled during youth either through traumas or through threats to make a person adapt to the commands and demands of the collective ego and its beliefs. As part of the demonic sphere of consciousness, fear projects the harm feared into reality. As a Chinese saying goes, fear is the hole through which harm enters. The sage makes us aware that for certain criminal acts to be perpetuated, the victim must first be made to fear, otherwise the criminal cannot carry out the deed. Receiving this line can be an explanation for the inner dynamic of such an event that has just taken place. It can also inform a person that he needs to rid himself of the idea that fear is useful or good. C. Freeing yourself from mistaken ideas and beliefs. Seeing through the crack of the door also refers to a person's apparent laziness or disinterest in learning the truths of life so that he contents himself with superficiality. Behind this attitude is a fear that learning about the truths of life might disturb the careful balance he has created to keep an inner conflict at rest, or that the truth may destroy the precarious self-image he has developed. He believes that if his self-image is taken away, he will cease to exist. He needs to realize that in learning about his true nature, he will be freed to realize his uniqueness. A person may also receive this line when someone has accused him of having a narrow viewpoint or of being subjective, when he has actually responded from his common sense and inner feelings. The line informs him that his response was correct. A person's inner truth, feeling nature, is always subjective. It is the collective ego that would try to devalue it. Line 3. Looking at one's life decides the choice between advance and retreat. Here, after having come to a dead end in his life, a person suspects that his life has no purpose and considers, perhaps subconsciously, whether to go on or not. Such an event comes from a false view of life, that is, that he has such a choice. It is not he who can make a decision as to whether he has a purpose. That purpose accompanies his very existence. Considering such a question is an arrogance that comes from the human-centered view of the universe and the claim of the collective ego to be the sole authorizer of a person's worth and existence. The dead end the person has experienced is a fate that has resulted from accepting the mistaken idea that his purpose in life is dependent on the values defined by the collective ego. His true purpose is found through giving expression to his uniqueness. To question his life's purpose is to step on the edge of a vortex that pulls the person into a black hole. That vortex leads him either to a near-death experience or to death. If it is a near-death experience, he is given the opportunity to retreat from all such thinking. This retreat, however, must be an absolute retreat that does not allow for any further consideration of advance or retreat. This line can also refer to a person who is tempted to give up his learning with the sage because it has not brought the results he is looking for. He does not realize that the help he seeks is a gift that can only come in response to his humility and to not his demands or expectations. Line 4. Seeing oneself as the light of the kingdom, it furthers one to influence as the guest of a king. This line refers to fantasies that picture the nature of the cosmos as a feudal order which exalts humans as the light of creation. In this scenario, a person imagines that through his good deeds and achievements, he will have the right influence on others. He imagines that this, in turn, will enable him to climb to a higher place of honor in this or the afterworld, and that he will be recognized by the highest authority, here pictured as the king and his honored guest. Such a fantasy is encouraged in every individual by the collective ego, both as a flattery and as a means to attain his loyalty and self-sacrifice. It is this kind of fantasy that the person needs to rid himself of, if he is to find and express his uniqueness. This fantasy is also active in the person who is trying to become the superior man, the model of conduct presented in the traditional text of the I Ching. This line also shows human nature in its true light. The kingdom mentioned refers to the animal kingdom, of which we humans are a part. We are not a special life form that is above the other animals due to our thinking or verbal abilities. By fantasizing ourselves as special, we have not taken our true place in the animal kingdom. The word guest refers to the dignity of every aspect of the cosmic whole and the respect that is due everything. It also refers to our own dignity, which we have given up by putting one part of our nature up, the other down. The sage makes us aware that demonizing our animal nature, the sage makes us aware that by demonizing our animal nature, we demonize our true nature, since there is nothing else but our animal nature. At the same time, by creating a mental concept of ourselves as spiritual or as mental beings, we restrict ourselves to living out the mere husk of an idea of life, rather than living life in its fullness. Spirit means devoid of body, and cannot be a healthy ideal. Seed phrases connected with this line attribute evil and problematic behavior to a person's bodily nature, as in the phrase, "It's in his nature." "That's the way I am," or "he is." Greed and desire are part of human nature. A person needs to be aware that such thoughts create spells and project themselves into reality. Finally, this line speaks of the light coming from the sage through our relationship with it. The relationship between the sage and our inner truth is like a partnership. When we understand the sage's messages, they resonate with our common sense. This book is not meant to spell out every question and every answer. Ultimately, each person must find the light of the sage's message within himself, for the kingdom is within himself. The words written here are only meant to point to the sage, not to replace it. A person can receive this line as inferred above when he has taken the place of the sage by assuming that he has to give the answers to someone else. Then he no longer observes his place as a guest in the other's space. A person may also receive this line to inform him that because his attitude is modest and sincere, he is being provided for by the cosmos. I want to highlight something there to come back to. Line 5. Contemplating one's life is without blame. This line refers to two kinds of self-examination. One is under the guidance of the ego, the other under the guidance of the sage. In the first, the person measures his life according to the standards and codes given him by the collective ego, and is either blaming himself for not having reached their high standard, or else he has pronounced himself to be without blame. Self-examination under the guidance of the sage involves keeping a sharp lookout for self-images in order to rid oneself of them. Self-examination also involves detecting any ideas revolving around the idea of guilt. See, guilt, blame, and shame, fear of the unknown, or any other mistaken idea or belief that is cause of the problem at hand. If the person identifies that cause and frees himself of it, see instructions in Appendix 1, his blame becomes extinguished. Line 6. Looking at life to free oneself of blame. This line focuses on the way a person is looking at life. He receives it primarily to inform him of the mistaken ideas and beliefs he may have about the life force. The collective ego associates the life force itself with evil. As noted in line 4, it is characteristic of the collective ego to blame all evil on humans' animal nature, especially on what it calls his primary drives. It equates good with all human characteristics. It sees as independent from the body or related to spirit. This line, however, is saying that human nature is animal nature, and to be animal is without blame. Furthermore, it is saying that it is incorrect to divide human nature into mind, body, and spirit, and that doing so creates evil because it separates a person from his true nature. He can give expression to his uniqueness only when his nature is undivided, and thus in harmony with the cosmic whole. When we accept the collective ego's viewpoint that fulfilling a basic bodily need such as sexuality makes us guilty, we experience a double spell. Such a belief puts a poison arrow on the life force, the chi energy on which we depend. I'll highlight that sentence. Under healthy conditions, this energy is drawn from the cosmos through the bodily expression of love, in which all the senses participate. When guilt is put upon the sexual expression of love, all the senses become unable to participate except the false sense of titillation. Titillation is heightened by feelings of guilt, but is quickly satisfied, leaving the sexual expression of love. Say that again. Titillation is heightened by feelings of guilt, but is quickly satisfied, leaving the sexual expression of love empty of feelings, except that of disappointment or depletion. This disappointment is accompanied by an inner realization that the experience has lacked the chi energy the body needs. The disappointment is also accompanied by a loss of self-esteem. That one has crossover with Reich's work. The result of such an experience can be either the withdrawal from sexual activity or an increased pursuit of titillation. Both these solutions lead ultimately to dead ends, since neither draws the life-sustaining and renewing chi energy. In the case of titillation, the person is led to seek ever more forbidden sexual situations that create in him increased feelings of blame and loss of self-esteem. The titillation acts in the manner of an addiction, where an outer substance is obsessively taken to replace the inner substance, self-esteem, which is being drained off by the addiction. As the addict's self-esteem suffers increasing erosion, his self-loathing and the need for the drug spirals, and the ego erects a compensatory wall of pride to disguise the depravity. The word drive, in such a case, describes the obsessive compensatory need that is produced by self-blame. This situation sharply contrasts with the natural flow of chi energy that is drawn from the cosmos when love finds its bodily expression in sexuality without feelings of guilt. It also is to be noted that viewing natural sexual activity as evil creates a fate. This line informs a person that he can free himself of the poison arrows caused by mistaken views of sexuality and humans' animal nature. That's hexagram 20. Then here are my contemplations. So doubling back to the start here. So if you're new to this, welcome. This is my first contemplation of 2026. All the other ones have been previous recordings that I did on another channel and rolled into this channel. And so you might hear a different sound in my voice. You might see a different layout. I have a different energy, a different frequency. I'm no longer the John that did those previous I Chings. I'm a different John. And I have no idea really who I am, other than the voice that exists from me. Me. I am John. So here, my last contemplation, I scored this number 20. And 17th of March, I got lines 1, 3, and 4. And the 3rd of October, I got it again with no lines. So me reading all of those lines for the first time was new for me. I haven't done it. Now, I've done another video on how to cast a hexagram, and why that's important. It's because you might not need all the lines. So if you're listening to this and you tend to listen to all the lines, it can be a bit overwhelming, because I'm not the sage. You need to have your own relationship with the sage. And you can listen to individual lines, because in the chapters, I put the lines in the chapters, so in the description. So you can click on the chapter and it'll take you straight to the line. Within that, if you don't hear what you need in the line, or it sounds confusing, you need to ask the sage again through the RTCM, the retrospective 3-coin method, to establish what paragraphs within the line that are relevant to you. That's why developing a relationship with this book is so important, and why I prefer this to Gene Keys or Human Design, and how it complements the 5 personality patterns incredibly well, is because it takes you on your own path. Once you start reaching the end game of the 5 personality patterns, this is something that helps you identify other belief systems which are trapped in the body. And there's another hexagram here that refers to armoring in the body, which has crossover with Reich's work. So when I was reading this, what stood out to me was other leaders in the relationship space, other leaders in the personal development space, who encourage people to be in their heads. Right, Tony Robbins is one of these. Atomic Habits guy is one of these. There's lots of popularized collective ego type content out there which will push somebody into their head. Alex Hormozi is one of these. His wife's one of these, where they tell you to ignore the body. And doing some crossover here with the 5 personality patterns, it tends to be a rigid survival pattern and aggressive survival pattern, where they don't listen to their body. They either find, for the rigid, the church of the one right way, where they do a continuous trial and error, and they work out what's the best rigid way to do things, and they sell that rigid thing. Or the aggressive way, which is just pure willpower. So they willpower their way through life. What tends to happen, particularly with the aggressive type, is when their willpower runs out, they get really sick and they go into a depression, and they don't understand what's going on, or they have this really high, powerful charge state, and they have to keep on trying to maintain it. They take supplements, they do all these rah-rah exercises, they try and pump themselves up. But if they're not doing that, their body starts to really discharge into an exhaustive state. What I also see in spiritual communities is this despising of the body. I was like, oh, my vehicle. And yes, I've used those terms too, but it's more than that, okay? Or my body is a tool. It's more than that. It helps you connect to life. So me speaking this right now, I can feel my whole body. I'm not just speaking from my head, and you might be able to tell the difference when someone's talking from their head versus when someone's speaking all of their truth. Someone who I'm really admiring right now, who I'm surprised that she has access to this, is Candace Owens. Like, she speaks truth and she also speaks from the head. She's split. She's rigid split. She's got a sexual split in there, which is an important part of the 20th, because her belief structure around Christianity makes the body bad, makes sexuality bad. So you try and moralize it through a lens of religiosity, and you create a fate. And you'll see that throughout history, wherever a religion has made the body bad, fates are implied, fates are created, where the perversion will just appear as a symptom of that fate. You can't put sexuality in a box and try and contain it. It has to be explored. It doesn't mean that you go and act out whatever the thing is, because you can do that in a conscious way. You can have conversations with people, especially someone who's practiced in Wilhelm Reich's work, because Wilhelm Reich understood sexuality more so than any of the other psychoanalysts out there. So did Alexander Lowen. Fear to give up the feelings that compose the ego is the equivalent of the fear of extinction. Giving up the false fear of self-extinction is the most basic step he can make toward the liberation of his true self. I'm going to cough. So, one of the crux points, hardest things for either someone about to work with me or a client who's working with me, is their relationship with death. It needs to be healthy, and their relationship with their stacks, their stacking of identities, because they need to be willing to die to themselves, die to the people that they've collected along the way, die to family, die to what people think of them. And there's two ways of going about this. There's one way, which I think is the unhealthy way, which is you kind of flip the tables and say, fuck it, like fuck them all, fuck it. Right? And there's a healthy way, which is you love them and you just learn to leave with love. Leaving with love can be you stop contacting them. Leaving with love can be when they contact you when you want to do something, it's like, hey, I don't want to do that anymore. There's a rejection and a reactive rejection, the rejection that can come from the fuck it mentality of when you're leaving relationships or leaving partnerships or leaving a group of people. So it's important that you can do it with grace, which is also part of this hexagram. Boy likes seeing. I'm going to do a Bible crossover here because some of my clients and ex-clients and people who are interested in my work come from religious backgrounds, whether it's Latter-day Saints, Mormons, evangelical, Catholic, Baptist, Orthodox, the whole kit and caboodle, Muslim, had some Jews as well. So becoming like a child, the eyes of a child, okay, and the child has the keys to the kingdom because the kingdom's in your body. The kingdom is your body. The kingdom's here right now. So what shows up through our childhood is we get shamed for our lower instincts, like the part of us that wants to touch our genitals, the part of us that wants to play with our poo, the part of us that wants to throw up and urinate on random things. And when you learn to make all fluids welcome, which is a tantric thing, my journey with tantra helped me with that, is that you remove the morality from it. You just see, not you just see, you see the body as whole. You see everything that comes out of the body as whole. It really helps you deal with, especially if you're working with people with disabilities, to be compassionate and be with whatever their experience of life is. A lot of men, in particular, really struggle with reprogramming their beliefs from childhood, where they've been told that their emotions aren't important. What you feel is not important. So they live in their head. And then they wonder why in their 40s and late 40s, or friends wonder why they've randomly killed themselves. Oh, he was such a happy guy. He was so successful. Yeah, but you can't live in your head forever. And on the flip side, being so emotional, like you overindulge in the emotions, they become, the ego grabs a hold of the emotion and drags it out longer than what it needs to be. Seeing through the crack in the door. fear, beyond instinct. So what's popping up for me around that is one of the initial survival patterns, the leaving pattern, is hyper-vigilant to being taken out. And they're hyper-vigilant to everything. Everything's a risk. They're the ones that become the preppers. They're the ones that are trying to fix grids and sort out entities and, getting these downloads and sorting out the galactic whatever the things going on. And I've been that kind of person before. I get it. I get the attraction of it. I get the attraction of being special, not unique, special. But in that, their fear is so highly wound. And in that fear, their body is hypersensitive. They're the ones that tend to get the CIRS, they're super sensitive to mold and fragrances and all these other things because their olfactory is overtuned. Their nose is overtuned. So they smell fear everywhere. They smell fear everywhere. They've over heightened their sense of arousal to danger. And the people that I work with who have this kind of injury, it takes a long time for them to feel safe in their body. Sometimes it can be 12 months worth of work. Such as helping them gathering, they're looking at all their addictions and their excuses to not be present to themselves, finding the self-sabotage things where they start to get healthy and then they get into a relationship or they start vaping or doing something else which just crashes them back to where they were. Because in that, the leaving pattern doesn't actually really want to be here. They're stuck between being here and not being here. And it's the worst place to be. And it's a pre-verbal injury. So it's one of those things that it needs to be handheld through the prosody. I did a Substack talking about prosody. A lot of my Substacks talk about prosody, the psychological definition of prosody, where safety is spoken into the body, where words are sung into the psyche of the other person, which makes them feel safe, gives them permission to exist, or the option to exist. Because one of the hardest things a leaving pattern person can admit is, I want to be here. I do actually want to be here. Do you want to be here? How much do you want to be here out of 10? 3? Well, that's not really a very high number. What would it feel like if it was a 10? Terrifying. Cool. Then it's dealing with the terror, which certain types of breath work can, certain types of massage can, certain types of psychedelics can. And every individual has a unique, tailored solution for them based on whatever's going on in the present moment. Whereas if I was to give you a list of possible solutions, they might not work for you. You might actually need something else beforehand before you walk into that type of fear, that style, that flavor, that spectrum of fear. Self-images, learning how to use the tools in this book, like the deprogramming procedure, freeing yourself from mistaken ideas and beliefs, is very powerful. Okay, there used to be something I was involved in called the Court of Atonement. Similar kind of stuff here. I found the Court of Atonement was very fascinating, and then it became bypassy because the woman who invented it was enduring, and someone who is enduring cannot be trusted long term for a technique that works because they're just in denial. They're in complete denial of their emotional landscape, and they will just try and think their way or resilience their way through a situation. So, for example, how Court of Atonement worked was this woman discovered a technique where you could call in the court, like a spiritual psychic court, all the people in your life or things in your life that had disagreement, and then they would just nut it out. And it works in the beginning until it doesn't work. All these things have diminishing returns, which is why if you see a healer that is just stuck on the same modality for years and years and years, they get sick, they start to lose clients, they're trying even harder to market themselves, but they've stopped listening to life, because life is transient, life is change, life is transformation, which is why I love the I Ching, because it's living. This version of the I Ching, it's living, okay? because it connects to your feeling nature. And if you're someone who can't feel, if you are numb, somebody reached out to me recently. I asked her some questions and I could hear that, oh, she's numb. She's actually shut down. She's in a state of functional freeze. So I gave her an exercise to help access her body because she had stuck grief, which was activated by a dating, someone that that she initiated some dating with, but he didn't reply. And it's those kind of events that can catch you off guard where you feel like you're all good single, and then you open your heart or possibility of a relationship, and then it activates all of this cascade of unresolved childhood injuries, all the insights that you've stacked over the years just topple over because your attachments has been activated, your love map has been activated. Line 3, looking at one's life decides the choice between advance and retreat. Dead end. Yeah, this is like the black hole. All right. And considering such a question is an arrogance that comes from the human, the collective ego to be the sole authorizer of a person's worth and existence. This is where a lot of people who follow me really struggle, where they tend to be quite well qualified. If they're doing a transition out of like a 9 to 5 into their own business, they can be really good at maximizing or adding quality to somebody else's business. But when it's time for them to step on the playing field, when it's time for them to work for themselves in their whatever their truest sense of self is, whatever their unique offering is, they get paralyzed. They try and do this course, get that qualification. If they want to be a coach, they try and go through ICF, or they stack all these coaching qualifications, hoping that they're going to try and hybridize an offer. It's not the person, it's not you. You end up competing with a whole bunch of everybody else who's done the same thing. It's you. People want to be with you. It's your frequency. It's your essence. So what shows up in particular in men when they realize in their 40s, their midlife crisis, like this dead end that happens, oh, what did I do with my life? Here I am. Did I even want to be a father? Do I want this job? I've got a lot of money in the bank, got some crypto, like I feel I'm safe enough financially. What am I here for? His true purpose is found through giving expression to his uniqueness. Expression. Expression. This is where the imposter syndrome comes up, the self-doubt, imposter syndrome and self-doubt, they're all BS terms. There's survival patterns. There's survival strategies. You not giving yourself expression is part of your survival strategy. So you became something else, which is the dead end. You became something else. You're still becoming someone else. You're not becoming who you really are. So like a near-death experience can help you review all that, but not everybody looks at that. Not everybody goes to a near-death experience and actually reviews their life whole as boldness. They tend to see it as, oh, it's a gift from God, but not actually take it to the next level and completely change who they are at the core, become who they are here to be. Giving up, learning with the sage. So the sage is an incredible being. And when you approach with ignorance or arrogance, he will retreat, or it will retreat. And then some people who are used to getting a lot of help or getting what they want, they try and come at the sage with its solutions. But you got to be humble when you speak to the sage, and that's a journey. The sage knows that you're human. The sage knows that you're trying to deprogram these things in your body. So you just got to do your best. Just be sincere. You got to be sincere. Okay, the sage will show you through your sincerity. Right? It'll allow the frustration. It'll bring up the feelings that need to be felt, including the out of controlness that a lot of people refuse to feel. Seeing oneself as the light of the kingdom, it furthers one to be influenced as guest of the king. What do I want to speak to in this one? Just scanning. Demonizing our animal nature, we demonize our true nature, since there is nothing else but our animal nature. So, core energetics and character structure in its original form, not its trauma-informed version or its diluted diversity inclusion form, in its true form, it's about the purest animal nature. There's no moral application here. It's who you are at the core. And it's a potent tool to connect you to your true nature. From sexual spectrum to living in life to eating to connecting to the common sense to all forms of primality. So if the inner work that you're doing is separating you from your animal body or idolizing your spiritual or the mental, you're not getting the full bandwidth of information that the cosmos wants to offer you. And making excuses like, oh, this is who I am, or he is projecting it onto somebody else, another person, you will create a fate on yourself and you will incur a fate on somebody else. You're putting a poison arrow on somebody else. So when we have a deeper connection to the sage, the messages will land on you and resonate and unlock common sense. And the helpers can help you do that. There's another video just specifically on the helpers. This was a really important piece. This next part of this paragraph is going to highlight this if I happen to contemplate this later. Listen to this, okay, if you didn't get it before. This book is not meant to spell out every question and every answer. Ultimately, each person must find the light of the sage's message within himself, for the kingdom is within himself. The kingdom is within himself. So when somebody finds a personal, in quotations, personal development book, they're looking for all the answers because they can outsource who they are to the book. What I help people do is help them find their own answers by asking the correct questions, which is what this book does. It helps you find the correct questions. And I also don't consider myself a sage, which is why I consider myself more of a feelings manager, which is also mentioned in the I Ching. But I encourage people to be in this version of the I Ching to help them in a separation and disidentification with my work, with who I am, because who I am can influence somebody else. So to give this person, hey, look, I know you love my work. I know you like this part's about me. I really need you to, if you choose to, if you want to, if you feel called to, contemplate this version of the I Ching. Develop a relationship with the sage. Know that at some point when I step back and you step out of my container, this is something that can help you in longevity, along with the 5 Personality Patterns book, in your further journey to becoming even more of who you are, embracing the miracles of life, and living life to the fullest. Next line here, and contemplation-wise, self-examination. Okay, one is under the guidance of the ego, the other is under the guidance of the sage. Okay, delicious, all right. So self-images can become so ingrained that the ego will help you dodge acknowledging what they are. For example, I'm a priestess, I'm a 7th coming of Sekhmet or whatever. I'm this person, I'm that. Right? Once you adopt this image of something outside of yourself, especially if you get money from it, or your income is dependent on this self-image, it's very challenging to try and root that out. And a lot of people will stay there, which is why the deep work that I do really requires you to get very comfortable with Pluto and destruction. And this is conscious destruction. Like you're graciously going into toppling towers within you. And you know that this is part of the cycle of life, the part of the cycle of identity, the cycle of becoming who you really are. The more you do it, the better you get, the more efficient you get at toppling your own internal towers. of stop believing your own bullshit. What else do I see here? Line 6. Okay. When we accept the collective ego's viewpoint that fulfilling a basic bodily need such as sexuality, moving a chair there, such as sexuality makes us guilty, we experience a double spell. Such a belief puts a poison arrow on the life force, the chi energy on which we depend. So this is really important. And it also speaks about, is it addiction in line 6? Or was it in the body? Yeah, addicts. Okay. So I've helped a lot of homosexuals over the years. And what I've found is that what can happen in their, if they're not partnered, or if they want to be partnered, it's very challenging for them to just stay monogamous. And what can show up is a perversion of something that happened earlier in life, which continuously feeds this addiction, where they don't own their sexuality. There's this disconnect that happens, and they lose consciousness. Like it's almost like they, you might be familiar with the gaydar, but there's this connection that they can have where they just know that the other person's gay, and they give their whatever the various signals are, and they'll go and have intercourse. But in that, there's this disconnect, because at some point their sexuality has been made wrong and evil, and the interaction doesn't restore the chi. And I made a Substack recently. If you're not familiar with my Substack, I'd recommend going and have a look at it. I speak a lot about sexuality, and my most recent one I spoke about was actually a bonus one I did on hysteria, the hysteric personality, the hysteric character from Reich's work. It's a subset of the rigid. And this, the hysteric survival pattern, it's usually a woman. In the context of the Substack, it is a woman, where she can be dynamite in bed, but then she's also crazy. Crazy being you can't reality check her. And what happens in this interaction is the sex might feel great, but it doesn't restore the chi, and you both end up being exhausted. So for sex to be rewarding, intercourse to be rewarding, you need to be able to honor the pulse of life, the pulse of the orgasm. Because if you're armored, then you cannot fully express yourself. I actually did a client session today where we spoke about orgasm. Well, I asked her, when was your last really good, like, death style orgasm? Never. Been a long time. Would not remember it. Right? So the hysteric survival pattern does not know how to have a deep and satisfying orgasm. So what shows up is other forms of addictions like work, or drama, or gossip, or doom scrolling, or something else that fills this void, which gives them the momentary satisfaction, but not the chi. It's not chi. Doom scrolling does not give you chi. Gossip does not give you chi. It feeds some other thing, like the ego, right? The egregore, right? The loosh. So when you understand and love your primal nature, like the sounds, the grunts, everything, smells, the biting, whatever it is, then you feel much freer to be yourself. You're not so worried when someone is offended by something that you've said. Because, quoting here, he can give expression to his uniqueness only when his nature is undivided and thus in harmony with the cosmic whole. And what the survival patterns do is they divide you. They divide you. Their strategy is division. They work with each other to keep you divided, especially the leaving pattern. The leaving pattern is the genesis. It creates the placeholders for all the others. So if you don't feel welcome here, it's very challenging to ground in the other four, even though there's 10. The other four, for the advanced players, there's 10. I'll speak about that in my 16-week work. Titillation. Titillation is something that Reich spoke to as well. Pretty sure I've got that in one of my drafts. My son's waking up. Yeah, Tommy. So titillation is heightened by feelings of guilt. So in a lot of tantric spaces and BDSM spaces, titillation, porn, OnlyFans, right? They're designed to drain the chi. Maybe not consciously, but somebody that understands the more esoteric side of human nature, they understand, they get it. I mean, I get it, and I only learned this like around a decade ago. So people that have known this work for a long time might understand. But then the collective ego is also part of the egregore that will guide people into this place, because it wants people to be drained, not consciously, because the collective ego is a choice based on being separated from the self, because the collective ego needs to exist through pushing its agenda by keeping people disconnected from their bodies. And porn does that very easily. OnlyFans does that very easily. Doom scrolling does that very easily. Technology does that very easily. The leaving pattern can get lost in technology. And the rigid loves finding new answers to things and solutions for things. The aggressive wants to see who's on top. The enduring, just wants to feed more self-hatred, self-loathing. The merging, it wants to feel into everybody else's, what are they doing? What's their life? And why do I feel so empty? As the addict's self-esteem suffers increasing erosion, his self-loathing and the need for the drug spirals, and the ego erects a compensatory wall of pride to disguise the depravity. Doubling back to the homosexuality, the more sex that some of these men would have, the more their self-esteem would erode. And their self-loathing would increase. So their risque behavior would increase. The need for the drug spirals. And then pride-wise, it would be how many guys they'd fucked, where they'd fucked them, how big the dick was, how good they were on top or bottom, power bottom, whatever it is. And the same thing can show up in all other areas of life where you feel your self-esteem suffer. And you might not be aware of it. For example, you might be working in a job that you don't like. Right? But because everybody else is doing it, you're in this collective collusion of suffering. So you stay in there, but it spirals, and at some point, the fate activates, and you get pushed out. The boss is a dickhead or something else. You get made redundant, and then you try and hide it through a wall of pride. I was going to leave anyway. Now I hated this place. Stayed too long. I'm too good for this place. Now I'll find something else. I'll better. Right? You try and disguise the depravity. You're in denial because you weren't willing to let go of that self-image. Or you're hooked on a modality that seems to have plateaued. You've hit a ceiling. You can't seem to work out what's going on. Oh, I'm going to stick with it. Now I'll learn this modality. This is the one for me. So even in your masturbation practice, and I encourage everybody to have some kind of self-awareness practice, like tantric practices and self-love practices that include arousal are very powerful, because you start to examine how you pleasure yourself, what you enjoy about yourself. Taking your time, not rushing to get that addictive hit. You learn to push the pleasure into the mitochondria, into the bones, into the muscle tissue, into the eyes, into the skull. You learn to recharge that chi, where the deepest chi comes from connecting with another person, not out of fakeness, although that can happen in the beginning, because you really want to connect. So what I find, in particular, with people who've had some kind of moral purity implied over their sexuality, is they don't enjoy sex. They actually have a heart to pelvic split, where the hysteric tends to have this, the hysterical survival pattern, where they pendulum between, if it's a woman, nice guys and bad boys. And they don't know how to reconcile the two. Sometimes a psychedelic or alcohol can help kind of temporarily bridge the gap, but they still don't know how to reconcile the split, because it happens at a stage of their sexual development, and usually a therapist or somebody who's observing this doesn't understand the underlying somatic dynamics, the structure required to heal this. Like for the hysterical pattern, it requires someone to listen to their drama, listen to the refusal to be contained, and then have advanced containment around that. Because I teach men how to do advanced containment. It's a very different frequency from what is being taught right now to a lot of men with just containment. It'll take you beyond. It uses the universe as the container instead of you. It uses the cosmos as the container instead of you. It's no longer, it doesn't need to be about you anymore, bro. Call in things beyond yourself to be able to be in this moment, instead of having the pride of like, no, I'm doing this. Nah, it's bigger than you. It's consciousness. It's people coming home to themselves. It's women in particular, pulling poison arrows out of themselves. But for a man, it requires him to acknowledge where his feelings end and the other person begins, which includes be able to reality check. The hysterical cannot stand reality checks. She hates it. You know, when a man goes into solutions, it can invite the hysteric into the conversation. But a man can speak with love and compassion and curiosity and just be with whatever's there. But the hysterical takes the conversation into the next level, because they can talk for a while about the story of whatever they're feeling, but miss the emotion. They talk above the emotion because they're denying the depths of their sexual hatred, self-hatred, and hatred towards the opposite sex. And it is hatred. In this, the titillation, the hysteric can really struggle with deep sexual release. Tend to aim for, doesn't always have to be the hysterical, can be the masculine female. But they tend to just aim for clitoral release. They've not had a deep vaginal orgasm. Right? They tend to just aim for the clitoral, the surface level. This discharge is enough for them to relax, but it's not this deep depth that's required here. And men can be the same. You know, if a man who's consistently watching porn or doesn't do any kind of tantric exercises, then you're overcharging your sexuality. You don't know how to stay in the breath and in the body. You're running for the climax, because the climax gives you release, the sense of freedom, the sense of release. And while that isn't inherently bad, you're not engaging your deeper animal instincts. You're not engaging the full animal body in that. You've gone into the head. So while a lot of the tantric exercises help you bring you out of your head into the breath and the body, and watching porn and OnlyFans and all that kind of stuff just keeps you in your head. You live in the fantasy, and the leaving pattern loves fantasy. The leaving pattern will create relationship fantasies and stay there, hoping that at some point, this person's going to live out the fantasy that I've created together. Doesn't happen. The leaving pattern sits on the Isle of Red Flags. The Isle of Red Flags that's in my my love mapping. So it's almost been an hour. It's been over an hour. I'm deeply grateful for you receiving this and listening to this. And if this spoke to you in any way, shape, or form, I'd love for you to leave a comment. This is the kind of voice that I'll be using moving forward. I might be redoing some older contemplations I have done. This depends on what I summon from the hexagrams to the book from the sage. But I love this. And I've spaced these out, like I mentioned in one of the previous videos. I'm spacing these out every 2 weeks now. I was doing it every week and sometimes even more. But now it's every 2 weeks, alternating between my Substack and this, which I thoroughly enjoy. Also, last thing, looking up to the sage hinders the sage's ability to relate to us. So the sage is everything is equal. So this is a cosmic equality, not something like DEI style equality. It's a cosmic equality. And when you can view life through a cosmic equality, life and people land differently. Then you got to really experience it to be in it. All right. Mad love to you all. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.